Hello and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Joseph Krieger, and today we're pleased to have with us again Dr. Christopher Meletis, and he'll be discussing the role of nitric oxide in cellular health and specifically mitochondrial health and how it applies to our immune system. It's a very important topic, as you know, and we're pleased to be working with Berkeley Biology, who's a leader in the production of these products as well as testing equipment that allows us to know the different levels of these important molecules, how we can maintain our molecular health as we move forward into the winter season, through the pandemic, and overall. So, Dr. Meletis, thank you very much for being here with us today. We really appreciate your time to join us at Boston BioLife.
Well, thank you, Joe, for that great introduction. And it's a pleasure to visit with all of you as colleagues today. My name is Dr. Chris Meletis. I'm a naturopathic physician for the last 28 years. And today's topic is nitric oxide, the missing link for mental health, stress, and immune competence. And as we're going to find out, a lot more. So I've had the privilege of working here in Oregon as a primary care doctor. I enjoy educating. I've written 18 books, a couple hundred national articles, including some PubMed articles recently. And I just want to share a passion that we can all be the healthcare change and wellness change that we want to see, and start changing that frustration to success as we work together with the rich and the poor. And I actually started 16 clinics for the poor when I was a dean at the Naturopathic University for 7 years. So it's a privilege to be a consultant for Berkeley Life. And I will discuss some really cool facts about nitric oxide that you probably haven't heard about, and look at some peer-reviewed literature as well. So this, of course, is a clinician to clinician educational conversation. And of course, all our patients need to work with a primary care provider of some sort to ensure that they're getting quality care and continuity of care. We all know that our patients have a proclivity towards Googleitis. Everything's Googleable. In fact, there's a cartoon I just recently saw. And it was a physician bringing in a random patient from a waiting room and saying, they're Googling your symptoms for a second opinion. So once again, this is a clinician educational conversation. So let's topic of the day: lower nitric oxide with aging increases multiple susceptibilities. As they say, aging is not for sissies. So if we think about nitric oxide levels diminishing over the course of time, this means our blood flow is not going to be as great through those 60,000 miles of blood vessels. Our heart beats 103,680 times a day. We have an average pulse of 72 beats per minute. But once again, lower nitric oxide, we have blood flow issues. But we also have a lot of biochemical changes far beyond merely the blood flow. The human body, as I mentioned, has 60,000 miles of blood vessels, and it's critical for immune competence, oxygenation, as well as nutrient delivery. It's like planting a wonderful garden. If we don't provide the right oxygen, the right amount of water, the right amount of nutrients, we're not going to have flourishment. And we're not going to see flourishing of our cells. And whether we're doing more advanced treatments, stem cells, PRP, or whether we're just wanting to make sure our supplements are working along with a good diet and lifestyle, we have to have nitric oxide for this to work. And it can be the missing link to a lot of those challenging cases that you might be facing. And we're going to discuss a hypothesis that while we're under stress, welcome to 2020, vasoconstriction can be causing not only immune vigilance issues, but also the target tissues. If you look at some of the viruses that have made the news, we know that there is microvascular changes. There's changes to the toes, changes to the heart, changes to the lung. But once again, we need to have good circulation in order to deliver our white blood cells, our natural killer cells, to the tissues. Plus, of course, our mitochondria, which we'll discuss today, also has to be properly fueled. So the goal is to leave at least one pearl with everybody that's listening to ensure that you've learned something new. And I think we'll accomplish that today easily. So when we look at the regulation of the cardiovascular system, we're looking at both the circulation and microcirculation. I shared that we have 60,000 miles of blood vessels. 18,000 miles of those are capillaries. So of course, all of us would look at our nails, assuming they're not painted, and say, oh, those are our capillary beds. Well, of course, we can do a capillary fill. We will compress our thumb to the top of our fingernail and our index finger to the back side of our finger and let go and say, okay, it should immediately return pink. And if it doesn't, that's a circulation issue. Of course, we see that with Raynaud's syndrome and other circulatory issues. We also see with peripheral artery disease, or what I call shiny shin syndrome, where people lose their hair on their shins. So once again, seeing that as one of the reasons nitric oxide is important. Of course, our red blood cells require nitric oxide to deliver oxygen to the cells of our body. And it also supports neurotransmitters. And the more stressed out we are, the lower our immune system. In 1988, when I graduated from Reed College with my undergraduate, I had to write a thesis my senior year, and it was titled Psychosocial Stress and Immunosuppression. When we get stressed out physiologically, physically, and or psychologically, we're going to have decreased secretory IgA, changes of our immune competence. So we're talking about keeping a more positive mood, and I'm not promising that we're going to all be Tiggers, but hopefully we won't have as many Eeyores. And we want to control the efficiency of the mitochondria in the generation of energy and hormonal regulation. Of course, we know that our mitochondria take in cholesterol and spit out as a synthesis pregnenolone, the great grandmother of all the hormones, our cortisol, our progesterone, our DHEA, our testosterone, our estrogens. We need to have healthy mitochondria, and we have to have adequate nitric oxide to have the Energizer Bunny battery for every one of our cells. And it's essential for our immune system to function, of course, and it regulates the inflammatory response. Now, too much or too little, and this is why we're going to talk about testing. So this was actually a email that, or actually a text I got last week. And it was on the weekend, as you can see here, at Saturday at 11:06, I'm responding, and a patient of mine says, "Hey, can I order a handful of Abbott tests from you?" I said, "Home tests?" And he says, "Yes, the 15-minute ones." I said, "What's your timeline?" "Christmas." "Okay, how many?" And of course, I'm going to offer him another test. I'm not promoting Abbott here. But what's interesting is he has not left his home and has not gone into a grocery store at all from March of 2020 until this very day. Food's delivered to his car. He doesn't go to see anybody. He didn't have Thanksgiving. He took it and has taken it very, very seriously. But he says, maybe I just test everybody. And can you imagine the burden on your mind when your kids haven't gone outside to play with anybody? He has children. His wife has not gone out, or nor has he, to see anybody for the last several months. So once again, how do we help our patients with their mental health? And or something as beautiful as pregnancy. I got this email on 11/30/2020 at 7:19 p.m. Welcome to being a primary care doctor here in Oregon. And he says, "I have a quick question. My husband tested positive for COVID. And by the way, she's due in January. So you get a sense of how far along she is. And she has other little munchkins running around. But her husband was spraying the germs around, not knowing he was even positive for the longest time. And she wants to know, what can I do to support my immune system?" So isn't it interesting? Now, if life wasn't challenging enough, and if we don't believe in Murphy's Law, and Murphy wasn't already existing in our lives, now we have this other event occurring that's causing more stress. So when we look at supporting our endogenous physiological production, we need to realize that we lose upwards of 50% of our nitric oxide by our 40s. Now, at that same period of time, something else is happening, and it's not by chance. So see that drop in nitric oxide. But ATP production is also dropping by about 10% from the age of 30 onwards per decade, and that continues on. And likewise, the nitric oxide drop continues on. So everything is interwoven. We know that as functional medicine providers. You cannot just treat one part of the body or one biochemical pathway. So nitric oxide is dropping, ATP is dropping, and NAD is dropping and diminishes about 50% from the age of 40 to 60, all of which are critical for immune function, cardiovascular health. And so looking at this composition of treat the whole body, but without nitric oxide to deliver the vitamins, minerals, and nutrients that we consume in our food, that we're supplementing with to our target tissues. If we're giving adrenal support, we want our adrenal adaptogenic herbs or whatever to get to the adrenal glands. If we're giving cardiovascular support, CoQ10, PQQ, NAD, MitoQ, we want to get it to the target tissue. This is why nitric oxide is so important. And we all know that with ATP production, we have, of course, oxidation, phosphorylation, the electron transport chain. We have to have it fueled. And the example I give for my patients is very simple. I'll hold up my iPhone, and no, I don't work for Apple, my disclaimer. And I say, well, if I don't have a charge on my phone, how good is my phone? Well, it's a glorified paperweight. Everybody agrees. Now, I says, if you look at all my little apps on my phone, I'm still showing it to my patient. I says, think of the apps like your DNA. Now think of your And we used to call those cell phones before we call them smartphones. It says, now look at your DNA and imagine if it had no charge, just like your cell phone had no charge, can your DNA manifest its full genetic potential? And that's the take home here, is that we need to deliver the nutrients. We need to replenish endogenous produced substances in our body. Endogenous because we make it on a daily basis. So we see this decline of nitric oxide, and from the age of 40, and you can see here, men drop off a little quicker than women. And in my clinical practice, lots of times men come into my practice with the nitric oxide classical symptom. Things aren't working so well south of the border. They can't rise to the occasion, so to speak. They have erectile dysfunction. Now, women will have lubrication issues in that arena. Then we see also the progression of endothelial dysfunction. And to go one step further, many of you know this word, but you don't know how important it is, the glycocalyx. So the glycocalyx resides on top of the endothelia, and it's actually furry. We always think of the endothelia as a non-stick pan, indeed, but there's these little hair-like microscopic, submicroscopic substances called the glycocalyx. You have to have a healthy glycocalyx and endothelial function in order for nitric oxide to be produced. If not, this is why people look for pharmaceutical meds to increase a target tissue like erectile dysfunction, but it's better to address the underlying cause of the problem and figure out how can I support the nitric oxide levels to get it into a more optimal range. So a noble molecule worthy of the Nobel Prize. So nitric oxide, three providers or researchers actually were shared the Nobel Prize. 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. I'm not sure who got the medal. They all got the medal. Who got the money? I'm going to assume it was all divided up. I don't want to go there. But what's interesting is they got the award for their discoveries concerning the nitric oxide molecule as a signaling substance for the cardiovascular system. Remember that heart that beats? Well, that heart during that systolic, we know, of course, it's compressed. And I often give the example the inside of my hand. If I make my hand into a fist and I'm squeezing really, really hard, and I open up, I ask my patients, what color will it be? And they're saying pink. And I open up and no, it's white. I says, during the systolic, the heart doesn't get a whole lot of oxygen. It's during the diastole or the diastolic. But once again, we have to have that vasodilation of the coronary arteries. And so we see this pathway. This pathway is part of the pathway that was elucidated by the researchers. And if we were to all go to PubMed and start looking at the research on nitric oxide, you'll learn about nitric oxide in plants. You'll learn about nitric oxide in eukaryotes and prokaryotes and all the biological systems. But this nitric oxide is very simple. We have to fuel it. And if we're not getting it in our diet, which most people are not getting, 89% of US citizens and North Americans in general are deficient in one or more nutrient. And most of us did not listen to mom. We're not eating our fruits and our veggies to get the citrulline and the nitric oxide precursors. So this is where you supplement a diet and make the best out of a poor circumstance. Now, with the aging process, with our diets, with exercise or lack of exercise, medications, stomach acid changes, the air pollution, genetics, and stress, all of these things are factors. We've talked about age and how nitric oxide levels drop, mitochondrial function drop. Most of us don't have the perfect diet. Maybe 3 to 4 maybe 5% of my patients have a pretty close to perfect diet. Most of us either under-exercise or over-exercise. I've actually had patients end up in the hospital with rhamnomyolysis, my CrossFitter groups, where they've just gone a little too far for their mitochondria and their muscles. Lots of the medications we're taking are inhibiting our mitochondria. And remember, the tissues that make nitric oxide also have to have healthy mitochondria. So it becomes a catch-22. And likewise, the stomach air pollution up here in the Pacific Northwest. We've had lots of air pollution with all the fires. Colorado did, Washington, California, and that put more benzene and toluene in the air. Our genetics are good. Our epigenetics are what we have control over. And many of us have now measured our SNPs. We know we have a polymorphism for catecholamine methyltransferase, COMT, or MTHF. But we can now manifest through diet, lifestyle, some manipulation of those genes. But we need, once again, nitric oxide to allow that epigenetic infusion of wisdom and intention that we're doing to allow it to get the most benefit. And of course, welcome to stress. And I have a saying, if we don't de-stress, we're going to be in a state of distress. And if we're in a state of distress, we no longer have the state of ease. So therefore, we're in a state of dis-ease or disease. So many of us have worked on trying to keep our mood bright-eyed and bushy-tailed during 2020 and every year of our lives. As healthcare providers, we see a lot of suffering, a lot of challenge, and the biggest stress in our lives is often the one we don't have control over. You know, like I can't try to climb the tree because you're not allowed to climb the tree. It says, do not climb tree. Well, likewise, we have to help our patients feel a sense of control. And through testing, as we can do with nitric oxide, they can do it at home, just like they would measure their ketosis or their blood sugar levels. Well, they can also measure their nitric oxide levels. We'll chat about that. But if we look at brain health and nitric oxide, of course, our brain, as we sit here, 20% of our oxygen is going to our brain, but it only weighs 2 to 3% of our body weight. 20% of our blood sugar is going to our brain, but once again, it only weighs 2 to 3% of our body weight. So once again, we have to have great blood flow, great nutrient delivery. We also have to remove waste products, so we don't have excess accumulation of tau tangles and amyloid plaques and lipofuscin and other substances would lead to premature aging. But at the same time, nitric oxide enhances neuronal activity mediated by the cerebral blood flow. So once again, we have to water the garden. So this is a highly metabolic organ, this brain of ours. And we know that the cerebrum is by far much larger, comprises 80 to 90% of our brain. Our cerebellar regions, only 10% of our brain by weight, but has 80% of the neurons of our entire brain. And we know when we fire up our dreaming, our thinking, or activity levels, we see increased blood flow. But once again, you have to fuel the function, and whatever fires together neurologically wires together. And this is where we start having healthier brains and greater plasticity. Also, nitric oxide decreases neuronal inflammation and oxidative stress. And inflammation and oxidative stress are primary drivers for most chronic diseases. We know it as healthcare providers as inflammaging. Inflammaging. And when I talk to my patient, I say, so if you're trying to control oxidative stress, what would you go to get at the grocery store or the big box store? What section of the supplement section would you go to? They say, I don't know. I said antioxidants. So now, once again, having the right amount of nitric oxide in your body helps quench the free radical damage. But of course, fruits and vegetables, the antioxidant supplements, also very important. So anxiety is, of course, very pervasive in today's world. And we have the highs and the lows, whether it be diagnostically bipolar and or whether or not it's dysthymic. And we want to support our brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and also oxide is important. And so the nitric oxide in this case is going to help support neurogenesis, enhance learning and memory. It also plays a critical role in synaptic plasticity. And what is plasticity? We all know that we are born with a certain IQ, but our IQ is fluid. We can raise it or lower it, diet, lifestyle, working our brain or not. But we lose 86,400 brain cells per day on a good day. But thank goodness for neuroplasticity and that pivotal word there, neurogenesis. And nitrates increase production of tetrahydrobiopterin, and it increases the production of the neurotransmitters. And you can see this in the picture, the diagram. We're seeing the phenylalanine, the tyrosine, the dopamine. And of course, we know dopamine, therefore, goes down to norepinephrine and epinephrine. And then we see our tryptophan to 5-HTP, and of course, our 5-HTP to serotonin, 5-hydroxyindyl acetate, and the ever important molecule melatonin. And we're also seeing the BH4, the, once again, tetrahydrobiopterin, going to nitric oxide, which therefore further feeds a feedback loop. So once again, it's kind of greasing the wheel. Once you get things going better, then all of a sudden you start seeing these progresses and jumps with many of your patients, like, wow, they're doing remarkably better. And why is that? So with sleep, as you can see here, I have the word restore or restoration. And restore, what are the first 4 letters? Rest. If we're not getting our sleep, we're susceptible to disease. We're susceptible to viruses, and we're going to generally be in a bad mood. And for those of you that have kids, you know, there's 2 things you do to treat kids immediately when they're having a temper tantrum. You either give them a nap or you feed them, because it's called hangry. And once again, the brain needs lots of oxygen, it needs lots of rest. And I think one of the worst punishments or tortures is sleep deprivation. If someone's up long enough, they'll do anything for that sleep. But REM sleep plays a significant role in maintaining emotional well-being and psychological balance. When we lose the ability to produce adequate nitric oxide, sleep is disrupted. What happens when we get older? We don't sleep so well. Well, my father-in-law would say from Oklahoma, well, once you get old, Chris, and he told me this when I was 30, I've been married 30 years now. And he says, Chris, once you get older, you're going to find you're going to go to bed with the night and you're going to wake up with the roosters. And I'm going like, okay, Oklahoma wisdom there, right? And lo and behold, nitric oxide levels drop, sleep drops. As we also saw, nitric oxide levels drop. Well, then serotonin levels can drop. And then, of course, we're not going to make our melatonin, which is critical for well-being. So once again, nitric oxide for sleep and that restoration. If you're working on joints, you're working on heart health, you're working on brain health, you have to allow your patients that restoration. So absolutely, totally critical. So talk about melatonin. Here's a 2020 article in Life Sciences speaking about melatonin. And remember how nitric oxide supports all these different pathways? Well, here melatonin is showing that it can help with cytokines. And once again, I'm not making any claim relative to the title, but this is the title of the journal article showing that melatonin is important. Back to the nitric oxide, back to the sleep, and once again, diminishing the cytokines. And so many of us have had our patients come in now dropping the word in conversation. Well, I'm a little concerned about my cytokines. Can we do a cytokine panel from Quest Diagnostics? I'm going like, oh my goodness, the Googleitis has really taken over even more. So you're asking for a cytokines panel. You figured out Quest Diagnostics offers it, or LabCorp, whichever lab, and you want me to order which one with which number? It really happens in my practice, believe it or not. So what about the adrenal glands? We're stressed out, we're worn out, our immune systems are where they're at, and many of us know the term wired and tired, and we're suffering from that. Our patients are. The glucocorticosteroid production in adrenals are absolutely imbalanced with whether or not we have enough nitric oxide. So production in the adrenal glands is increased in the absence of nitric oxide. When we have higher cortisol levels, we get more midriff, we get more sugar imbalance, we get metabolomic changes, which of course are prime morbidity factors for, once again, diseases of a multitude of faces. Cortisol is the only hormone that increases with age. It inhibits the inducible nitric oxide as well as the endothelial nitric oxide. It increases ROS, the reactive oxygen species. It decreases the synthesis of the tetrabiopterin, and it increases eNOS uncoupling, which is what you'll hear about. Like if you have the eNOS uncoupling, then you say, well, there's all these potential risks. Well, the thing is, you have to control it by nourishing the body across all the different levels of physiology. All of these decrease the production of and or make NO non-bioavailable. So not a good thing. The other thing, which of course diminishes with age, and we'll see this on our reference labs, like I said, Quest, LabCorp, whichever lab you're using, is they'll keep on lowering the reference range for DHEA. So from 31 to 40, you're allowed to have this DHEA level. And then once you're past 40, then you're going to have a lower range. So you don't have to shoot that high in order to qualify for being in the normal range and not getting flagged. Totally unacceptable. They just, once again, use the reference ranges for validation. We need to look at healthy, youthful levels across the board. Then we get to the effects of hormones on, once again, eNOS. And as you know, there's inducible NOS, sometimes known as immunological NOS. There's endothelial NOS, and there's the neuronal NOS. And so we see here the brain and all the arrows going over here to the effects of the eNOS. So if we're going prolactin, what do we see? Lots of positive effects here. And once again, the endothelial cells, but we have to have the proper amount of insulin. We have to have enough estrogen, progesterone, testosterone. And many of you already know this, that when you have a drop of estrogen, progesterone, or testosterone, you're going to have diminished mitochondrial function. And this is where, of course, what's a precursor for all of these? DHEA. Where do they come from? The mitochondria. So once again, nitric oxide levels. So if you're doing hormone replacement therapy, nitric oxide is part and parcel of teaching a person to fish while giving them a fish. We never want to just treat downstream by just giving them estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, and forget our DHEA and our pregnenolone. So the nitric oxide is part of that whole equation. Plus, for both men and women, when you're giving hormone replacement therapy, part of that's for sexual function or reproduction. And we want to, of course, support that, and nitric oxide is critical for pelvic congestion. So if you look at the ultimate of irrigation systems, and as you can see here, blue sky, large irrigation system there. Although the human heart beats 100,000 times per day and more, it pumps through 60,000 miles of blood vessels to trillions of cells. And the cells must receive constant supply of oxygen and nutrients via the ultimate irrigation system ever created. The heart pumps every day without interruption. I'll often have a pen on my desk, and I'll go click, 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 and I'm going, what you doing? Click. I said, I imagine if it's just with your heart, and it's beating at least 1 time per second, if not more. Think my thumb will show up tomorrow. We got to provide the oxygenation, the nutrients to the heart, to our little toes, to our hair, to our brains, to all our tissues. If you work on detoxification and you want to make sure your liver is detoxifying, we know there's phase 1 and phase 2. Well, you need to make sure you got the glutathione and the glycine, the other substances to allow phase 1 and 2 in your liver to work properly. So, but once again, those nutrients have to get to the liver, which means they have to absorb from the small intestine and the intestine. So once again, we're going to have absorption. So once again, nitric oxide levels, absolutely critical. Then we know phase 3 on detoxification is what? It is elimination through the kidneys, through the bladder and urine, and or through the bowels and the GI tract. Once again, they have to have enough nitric oxide and enough oxygenation, enough nutrients to serve their prime function. Otherwise, it's like having a kink in your hose. So immune function, unfortunately and fortunately, has been the topic of 2020. And we became highly aware that most of us touch our face a lot. We became very aware that most of us have habits that we probably ought to have changed over the course of time, from passing through grade school and kindergarten, where you're not supposed to rub your nose on your sleeve and you're supposed to cover your cough and all those basics. We all got reminded of that, and some of us didn't get passing grades. But then we go to nitric oxide signaling in T-cell mediated immunity. And so this is an article from 2018, Trends in Molecular Medicine, and nitric oxide is a potent stimulator of mitochondrial biogenesis. So remember, our nitric oxide levels are dropping upwards of 50% by the age of our 40s. Our ATP levels are dropping 10% as a result of drop of nitric oxide and other pathways, and our NAD levels are dropping. So nitric oxide is a potent stimulator of mitochondrial biogenesis and dynamics. So this is a good thing. We want to support those mitochondria because they're waxing and waning. So nitric oxide generated by eNOS increases mitochondrial size, number, and mass by stimulating the expression of the peroxisome proliferating activated receptor gamma. So wonderful little pathway going on here. And at the end of this long sentence of everything that's going on, and these slides are available for the audience, is the importance of eNOS in mitochondrial biogenesis and function has become evident in studies with knockout mice, which show reduced mitochondrial mass and O2 consumption even in cells expressing eNOS and or eNOS. So once again, nitric oxide, happier mitochondria. And remember, whether you're working on joints, heart, brain, liver, you name the body part, GI, SIBO, leaky gut, all those tissues have to have good mitochondrial support. And once again, adequate nitric oxide. So from the same journal, you're seeing here the effects of the eNOS in the center of this diagram, and over to the right, going to the mitochondrial recruitment. But what was the title of this article? It's about T cells. Well, once again, our immune system has to be fueled. If you send a work person out to dig a ditch, they better have water, food, and air. Otherwise, how are they going to dig a ditch? In this case, we have an immune system, which is like our own personal little army, which it is. It says, go defend the borders. Get rid of the problems within our body. Please protect us. But we have to have it properly fueled. Hence the mitochondrial support and nitric oxide at a multitude of levels, far too great to go into in this conversation. So we want to be in the Goldilocks zone, just like the Earth is in the Goldilocks zone of the Milky Way. Well, we have to have just a right amount of support of immune homeostasis, controlling our inflammation, and ensuring we don't have an excess immune response, which can lead to too many cytokines, or too diminished that allows our cells to get overwhelmed. So focusing on that Goldilocks zone. So what do we do? There's just so much for us to know as functional medicine providers. Well, you provide the nutrients to the body, and in naturopathic medicine, we call the vis medicatrix naturae. It's a Latin word or phrase that says the healing power of nature. You nourish the body, and the body knows what to do. It's been going on for millennia, way before all these pathways that we knew. And so if you look here at the mitochondrial role for immune energetics, we're seeing there's an intimate role in the dynamics of the T cells and something called MAVS, M-A-V-S. You'll see that in the little figure 1 box. It says mediated antiviral signaling. And so our little batteries, or Energizer Bunny batteries, are actually saying, oh my goodness, there's a virus going on here. Let's start fueling our immune system. I'm, of course, personifying this conversation. And it actually says intruder alert, and it starts energizing our immune system and go get the job done. But once again, we have to have the nitric oxide. We look at the susceptibility of disease. Who's succumbing? People with multiple morbidities, diabetes, heart disease, okay, well, all very classical low nitric oxide states, and aging. These are people that are highly susceptible. So we want to level the playing field within the confines of what's capable. So once again, peroxisomes and MOBs. And our peroxisomes are, of course, critical. Many of you have heard about the lectures on plasmalogen. You know about NAD. But this is about nitric oxide, and it all comes together in your clinical practice, regardless of what you're targeting. And if you look here at the natural killer cells and a hypoxic cell stress. So what happens if you have that kink in the hose? You don't have enough nitric oxide. You can go hypoxic. And this is going to stress your natural killer cells. I call them the Green Beret, Navy SEALs, Army Rangers of your immune system. And then as a result, you're going to have diminished function and ability to protect your body. So once again, oxygenation, absolutely critical. And we now look at the mitochondria, the indispensable players in innate immunity and guardians of the inflammatory response. And in the highlight, it says, recent findings have made it increasingly apparent that mitochondria essentially involved in energy production have evolved as principal intracellular signaling platforms, regulating not only innate immunity, but also the inflammatory response. But we just learned on the other slide, nitric oxide. You have to have the nitric oxide. But as you'll find out in your clinical practice when you start testing people, which we're going to chat about now in a moment, you're going to find a lot of your patients are very low in nitric oxide. Surprisingly, and these even the healthy patients, the ones you thought, oh, they're going to pass. You're like, oh, that's awfully pale pink. And so once again, we want to support those pathways. And by doing this, the mitochondria's antiviral signaling protein, the MOVs, is the harbinger of innate immune cascade. So once again, very, very important pathway. We're not going to go into it. I go and give longer lectures on these topics, but it's intriguing to say, like, when I graduated 28 years ago, all these words weren't largely even known, let alone the pathways elucidate. Yeah, we knew about RNA, we knew about DNA, we knew about CD4 and CD8, helper suppressor cells, but TH1, TH2, and now TH3, and all these different cytokines. A lot of advancements have occurred, but when we keep it simple and we fuel the body, it's all of a sudden very easy for us to have great successes in our clinical practice. So Beth Shirley, a phenomenal colleague, educator, internationally known pharmacist, actually wrote an article in April 2020. And if you want a copy of it, you can email Donna at Berkeley Life or give her a call. And you can actually find this wonderful little article where she goes through everything from nitric oxide dysregulation, oxidative stress, hypoxia, and there's more pages on this wonderful article. This is just a tease. So once again, something definitely for perusal for yourself as you look at the mortality and morbidity and the fear. We have to somehow empower ourselves and our patients to realize that a competent immune system is just that, it's competent. And it doesn't give us a guarantee, but it's sure great to go outside wearing a waterproof trench coat than going outside and saying, darn, it's raining out here. So many of our patients are envisioning a sense of control. They say, I'm all good. And this is supposed to be parody here. Got my toilet paper, got my mask, I'm all good. Are they good? So once again, this is why we want to test. We want to ensure their nitric oxide levels are good. And so very simple, 1, a 2, and a 3. I have a little video coming up here. And we want to get to the target. We want to see where a person gets. I can tell you when I first did this test, I was not a target, not in a positive way. I was a target for disease. I was very pale, very depleted. And I'm going like, but I take so many supplements. But then, of course, I started taking my Berkeley, and voila, I now pass, at least in one part of my life. And this is good because, as you saw, nitric oxide is so critical. I want to be able to think. I want to be able to speak. I want to be able to go outside. And I want to know that my immune system is competent. So interesting. What about just feeling better? Once again, we're talking about mood here too. Well, a profile of mood states questionnaire, they looked at cognitive function and nitric oxide levels. 10 Caucasian individuals, 6 female, 4 male, participated in a study of nitric oxide levels and cognitive function. What did you say? All of us with this 2020 challenge are becoming a little bit more forgetful with rare exception. And you're like, oh my goodness, am I losing it? No, we have too many things in our forebrain and our prefrontal cortex. Our cerebellar area is not as healthy and as robust as it needs to be. So we have everything in our temporary memory. But here we see the 6 females were all 70 years old and 4 of the males, 69 and 72. Each client completed the abbreviated POMS, which is a profile of mood state. And they looked and they started taking the Berkeley professional supplement. And once again, upon completion of the study, each of the 10 clients tested. Their strips had been depleted prior to. Now they're doing much, much better. And they redid the test to see, hey, how are they doing? And what did we find out? 43% of the women reported feeling livelier, and 23% of the men did. 65% of the women reported feeling less confused. 42% of the men did. 67% of the women reported feeling better and more likely to concentrate. 58% of the men did. 54% of the women reported feeling less fatigued. 23% of the men did. But remember, men drop in nitric oxide levels even more quickly than women. And unlike women, which lose their period somewhere along the way with menopause, andropause comes in here. And some of these guys might have had also low testosterone, who would know? And as you can see, all these differences, the anxiety, the less forgetfulness. And as you can see here, 66% of women reported, hey, I'm not as forgetful. And 44% of the women reported, I'm less pushed and less anxious. And if we could just get a portion of our population to be better, and we know fatigue and forgetfulness is multifactorial, but if one intervention can make it better, and now let's say we were to give them 5-HTP, which was not done in this study, and we supported their serotonin, or you gave them N-acetyltyrosine or mecunapurans, a source of dopamine. Could you imagine what the numbers could have been if it became a multi-site? This was just, hey, what would happen if we just cleaned up one area of their chemistry, let alone all the other complaints that these people have beyond their mind or above the clavicle, so to speak. So let's take a look here at how simple this test is. And so your patients can actually have those test strips at home, or you can choose to just do it at your office. What they do is they put saliva on one side of the test strip, then they bend over to the test strip and put the reagent against the saliva that's on the non-reagent side, and they see whether or not within 15 seconds, hey, what's my level? Am I making improvement? Do I need to change things? And hopefully they're going to eat more beets and more kale and more arugula and all these vegetables that mom told us to eat, and most of us still have childhood traumas about. But this formula has been shown, as you saw in the case of 10 individuals, to actually see a positive change. And we expect that change within a couple of minutes, but you take a day in, day out, you're backfilling gaps in your nitric oxide fortification, so to speak. And we need to have that nitric oxide, as we've seen, for so many different pathways. So a summary here is we have a reduction by about 50% in our mid-40s, and we might have as little as 15% of our nitric oxide capacity in our 60s. Supporting the nitrate to nitrite to NO pathway not only increases nitric oxide, but it also reduces the recouple nitric oxide to increase NO through the eNOS pathway and decrease oxidative stress. Also, testing patients' nitric oxide levels on a regular basis is very convenient, and it empowers them. Our patients need to feel empowered. Just like when our diabetics say, oh, my blood sugar is better. But for them to know, hey, my nitric oxide is helping me on all these different pathways. It's giving more circulation. Plus, we will know it's allowing the other nutrients, the other therapeutics, whether it be stem cells, whether it be a PRP, so more aggressive interventions, or more supplementally or food-wise, let's get those nutrients to the target area. We count on UPS and DHL and FedEx to deliver our packages. Our nitric oxide's allowing for clearing of the pathway and allowing the packages of nutrients and oxygen to get to our tissues. So if you're interested in recommendations, some of the literature, some of the other content that Berkeley Life has, and you want to incorporate the testing and the product in your practice, you can email Donna and or call them. And it's been an honor and privilege to visit with you. And I hope I succeeded in sharing at least one tidbit that you didn't know. My name is Dr. Chris Meletis, and keep up the good work. And together we're going to be the healthcare reform we want to see.
Thank you very much, Dr. Meletis. That was a great presentation. And I think what was important about what you did was you really explained the interrelationships of these different important molecules like nitric oxide, but also how it pertains to vascular health. So looking at the glycocalyx and looking at, other important components of our vascular health, the role of the mitochondria, and how our immune system is directly affected by all these different important molecules. And I thought it was an interesting perspective when you looked backwards at what we knew from a biochemical standpoint, 10, 15, even 20 years ago, things like DNA and RNA. We knew how proteins were created, but we really didn't understand completely the role of all these secondary pathways and their influence on health and wellness. That coupled with epigenetics and environmental things really is the key for patients to understand their own health and to be able to take charge. Berkeley biology and scientific physicians like yourself that really help bring this to focus and allow patients in everyday life to have the tools they need and the technologies available to them to really affect their health and overall well-being. So we thank you very much for your time and appreciate you being here. We look forward to seeing you again at another Boston BioLife webinar. Boston BioLife is pleased to offer our healthcare providers a very important online CME process. Given this time where most trade shows have been canceled and traditional methods of getting CME credits are not necessarily as available as once they were, Boston BioLife has a unique way of looking at research publications through our research publication tool, and to be able to get up to 20 CME credits for $4.99. This could be very important as the year ends, and we make it very easy and convenient for you to do so. Generally, CME credits are timed by the hour. In this case, you're going to get credit for researching relevant publications in your area of interest. So we will provide you the information on our website, bostonbiolife.com. So if you're interested in acquiring 20 CME credits plus access to our research publication tool, which features every peer-reviewed journal article in medicine and biotechnology from around the world in real time at your fingertips for 1 year, comes with this program. So we look forward to supporting you in your clinical research as well as acquiring CMEs in your practice for certification and licensing.
Thank you for attending another Boston BioLife webinar. At Boston BioLife, we are committed to providing resources and information through education and awareness to our technology providers, scientific community, and healthcare providers. We are constantly adding new content to our webinar profile. These topics come from the world of biology, clinical practice, as well as practice management, and we're often highlighting new and emerging therapies that have a direct impact on our healthcare providers and their patients' lives. For information on these webinars, see Boston BioLife /webinars for this webinar and other webinars, and these are often available for replay on demand, and as I said, feature new and emerging therapies in healthcare that are individualized and for personalized precision medicine. So again, for additional information on this topic or other topics, or to ask the presenter a question, please send us an email to info@bostonbiolife.com or call us directly at 978 569-8080. Thank you very much for attending another Boston BioLife webinar. We aspire to be a resource for new and emerging therapies for healthcare providers, technology providers, scientists, and individuals interested in new and emerging therapy. On behalf of myself, Joseph Krieger, President of Boston BioLife, and Michael Cameron, our Creative Director, thank you for attending another Boston BioLife webinar. We look forward to seeing you in the future.